You know, when you hold somebody in really high regard, somebody that perhaps you've never even met, you might have read their book or listened to a talk of theirs, or perhaps you've been listening to their podcast for a while, and then you meet them in real life and they totally let you down and they're not at all what you were expecting. Now, I have to admit that I had that worry a little bit with my guest today, Nigel Marsh. I read his book, I think it was back in 2010, Fat 40 and Fired, and it remains to this day one of the best books I've ever read. It's proper laugh out loud. And I also saw him speak live in Sydney, which was brilliant. And I was so happy when he agreed to be a guest on my podcast. And then immediately had this worry that he might turn out to be really boring or snooty or just not what I was expecting at all. But I needn't have worried. He's as funny and entertaining as I expected, if not more. And he's just a genuinely nice guy. And I really, really loved speaking to him. And I hope that you enjoy this interview as much as I did.
Welcome to Your Big Career Move, where your host, Yeshim Nicholson, chats to people about their big career moves, uncovers their motivations, their fears, their successes, and everything in between. Be inspired by their stories, and if you're thinking of making your own big career move, head over to yescareercoaching.com. If you enjoy this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
How did we connect? How did we connect?
So we first connected in Sydney.
Did we live together at university? I'm so sorry if we've forgotten.
That would be quite awkward, wouldn't it, if that was the case? No, we met, but I don't expect that you'll remember this. The TED Talk in Sydney.
Oh wow, you were
At
there
the
on
Opera
that
House.
day.
Yes.
So the hilarious. I only did that because I know a bloke called Remo who said, "Can you do this thing?" And I thought, well, why would I want to do that? And you're not going to pay me. And I did it, and it was incredible. It was an amazing day.
Yeah, I bet it was. And yeah. I mean, probably amazing because you met me. Is that what you meant?
Well, that's the main takeout.
I thought so. Yeah. No, so I think you stuck around afterwards, as I know you like to do at these things, and I came over like a proper groupie, and I'm pretty sure I asked you to sign the book. And I told you at the time, which I'm sure you don't remember, but my husband, who I've been with for almost 20 years now, in the whole time we've been together, I've seen him read 2 books. I'm not exaggerating, 2 books, and they're both yours.
That's really, really nice. Gosh.
Do you know what? I read your Fat 40 and Fired, absolutely loved it. And I was like, honey, I know you're not a book reader, but you've got to read this book. It's just so brilliant. And he loved it. And actually, I saw my brother today and I said, I'm interviewing this guy who's in Australia, but he's a Brit, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, yeah, didn't you give me his book? So I have, I've basically been doing your PR single-handedly for the last 15 years.
We love you. Although I've got a phrase for you that I tell my family when they say, oh, I loved your book. I've lent it to all my friends. I go, recommend it, don't lend it.
Yes. Or buy them a
copy.
You go,
all my friends, I've lent my copy. I'm going, no!
Please buy it. Well, you'll be pleased to know that as we were going to have this conversation today, I was like, well, I should probably reread his book, at least one of them. And I've got so many books that I was trawling through, and I couldn't find it. And so I bought another copy, you'll be pleased to know. So, so my brother may have the copy that I lent him 10 years ago.
So do you know anyone that's turning 60 soon?
Oh, plenty of people. Yeah, that's a great present idea.
That is the present.
Yes. No, I mean, you're selling to somebody who's already your biggest fan, so it's all good. So, but we're here today to talk about your career change, because your first book, Fat 40 and Fired, is all about basically the biggest career change of your life, I guess. So is it okay if you tell us a bit about what happened?
It's actually quite good timing to talk to you, because it's one thing to write Fat 40 and Fired and go through those events, and it's a good book, and I've had lots of nice feedback, and it did change my life. But it's more interesting to say, but how are you going 20 years later?
Yeah.
You think you're clever, mate. and oh gosh, I'm going to be a yoga instructor, not a corporate CEO or whatever. Well, how did that go? You know, when you go, well, I'm divorced, I'm on meth, and I'm homeless because it was a disaster.
I really hope that's not the case, because this is going to be a really rubbish interview.
Don't change your career. That's what your podcast should be called. Don't change your career.
Don't go there.
So, I mean, I suppose I should answer the question for people who haven't got a clue who I am. Is I had a classic corporate career until I was 40. Was sent by a multinational around the world for me to Australia, where I'd never been, to run a couple of companies. And, you know, long story short, after 9 months, they closed the firm. And so I was 40. I happened to be an alcoholic. I was grossly overweight. I had 4 kids under the age of 6, a wife that wasn't working, no friends or family in the country. You know, I thought my life was over. And I made the decision, which is a bit of a strange one, and I'm not, you know, this is not advice for anybody. I made the decision, well, do you know what? I'm going to change the rules, because I've played fair up until now, and, you know, corporate hamster. And that's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with being a corporate hamster. I you know, working hard. But where it led me was to be flicked on the scrap heap.
Yeah.
And you go, well, blimey. So all the advice was to get back on the bus. You know, just scrabble around terrified because I've got a mortgage and school fees, and get back on the corporate wheel. And I made the rather strange decision, as detailed in Fat 40 and Fired, to go, do you know what? You can all get nicked. I am not going to do that. Now, I mean,
you're just reminding me of the conversation that you had with, I guess he was your boss, the guy in the US, when you went to see him, when he basically told you that your job didn't exist anymore. I mean, your book is laugh out loud. I read a lot of books, and I don't laugh out loud to many, but yours is definitely one of them. And honestly, that scene, the way you describe that scene, is just absolutely hilarious, that he won't even address the issue at hand for the first, I don't know, what was it, 45 minutes. He just talks about the weather and all sorts.
And he asked me if Sydney still had that harbour.
That was it. I mean, like, how much of your book is made up and how much of it is God honest truth?
well, so I think genuinely it is 100% true, all of them. I mean, I change names to protect everyone apart from me. I mean, I'm the goose in all my books. I take the piss out of me. But as my dear old departed mum would say, I love polishing a story. Mm-hmm. Can I tell you a story that happened to me literally 2 days ago?
Please.
So my wife was walking with a friend, and I had to do a insurance claim. We just come back from Canada, but I know she's got a picture of her photo page of her passport on her phone. So I just texted her saying, sweetheart, could you ping me that photo, because I need it for this insurance claim. Anyway, and she texted it back. And then when she texted it back, I thought, oh Christ, we're out of milk. And I know she walks past the shop on the way back, and you don't want to see my wife if she can't have a cup of tea, so I'll ask her to get some milk. So I texted in capitals milk and emoji exclamation mark. And I thought, oh, that's a bit harsh. So I put an emoji love heart on. Anyway, when she came in after her walk, she gave me a sort of a more than usually tactile hug and a kiss, and said to my ear, that was so sweet. And I went, oh, welcome home. You've only been away for 40 minutes. Where's the milk? And she went, milk? Now, she hadn't taken her glasses. And she thought, God love her, that my response to her passport picture was for war MILF. She had written. My life is full of those sorts of stories. Now, so the story I've just told you is just because that happened 2 days ago. But if I was to write that, and some people, I mean, I don't mind, they just don't understand, that happened 2 days ago. Now, when I write my 70 book in 9 years' time, right, that story, the guts of it will be the same, is with no glasses. She's so confident of how she looks. She thinks, I look at her passport photo and think for war. But I might make it on Wednesday, not Tuesday. I might make it that she was walking with the vicar, not Lisa, blah, blah, blah. So it's all true. But someone said to me, I don't know, it wasn't, you weren't off for a year because you went back to work after 11 months. And I went,
what, in 29 days?
I went, radio. I mean, and then someone said, also, I wasn't 40. I mean, I was 39, but fat
Yeah, the
39
semantics.
and made redundant. It doesn't
Not
ring as
quite
much
the
as
same ring, you know.
anyway.
No.
So it's not a documentary. Your listeners don't want to hear my stupid book, but it's not. I'm writing it to entertain, and then under the radar, there might be a message that you might want to check about your work-life balance or your career or your drinking or whatever else. But my main intent, it's not a history lesson, is make your flight to Melbourne or Glasgow be slightly less boring because it's a nice book.
Totally. And get your husband to read,
Yeah, there you go.
Bonus. So to go back to, so you've flown to the US, your boss has basically taken forever, but eventually tells you your job doesn't exist anymore. And actually, I didn't realize that you'd only been in Australia for 9 months. I mean, that really sucks, doesn't it? And you haven't really established a life there. So then what happened for anybody that hasn't read your book yet?
Well, yeah. And they were, to be fair to the firm, that they were being, very nice, as in we were, it's all been a massive, we can understand it was a global merger. And I was collateral damage. They didn't do it on purpose to me, and they were being nice to me in their terms, which is I had relocated my entire family around the world, and it was my first CEO job. This was my big corporate break. So on every level, it was a complete disaster. And they were saying, we're awfully sorry. We will relocate you back to England. Mm-hmm. Now, all expenses paid, blah, 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 but not into the job that I had, which was I was the CEO of 2 firms, but into another job. Mm-hmm. So I took the decision. It was amazingly irresponsible on one reading of this. So there's security, but I'm still on the same hamster wheel. Yeah. Right. I could go back to London and they'd find some job. It would be a sideways move or a downwards move or whatever. And I decided that, again, this is not advice. I decided that I would stay at home. Mm-hmm. Not earn a penny, and sort some shit out.
And what was the main reason that you made that decision rather than get on? I think you referred to the seat on the bus quite a lot. Why? What was that?
Well, in a way that there's a slight falsity in Fat, 40 and Fired, in terms of if you don't know me and you just pick it up and read it and like it. Because the people who bought the film rights had this, where what they wanted was ad wanker turns into shepherd.
Right.
Yeah. It is. I studied theology at college. Mm-hmm. I'd like to think I'm a nice man. I mean, not Gandhi or anything, but I've always been thinking about what the point of life is and whatever. So when the events that happened to me, like you lose your job and you're around the world, I actually read a phrase in a book coming back from a meeting with that American, which was, mm-hmm. Pause for a moment, you wretched weaklings, and take stock of your miserable existence, which I think is how I started the TED speech, but it's just, have a think, mate. What the F are you doing? So I'll sit down and, have a think. And it was really liberating for me to turn 40. Because if the events had happened to me at 23, I would not have reacted how I reacted. Mm-hmm. And the advice that I give, and I'll come on to any advice if you want me to 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds, and I coach a few people and whatever, is different to the advice I give my 24-year-old.
Sure.
You go, so people, it's not like, ooh, I'm work shy or I can't go. Do you know, guys, I've put a suit on and done what you asked for 20 years, really, really, really diligently, quite successfully and hardworking, where everything else is secondary to your bloody career. And I've done that, and I've paid my taxes, and I've not broken the law. And I come last, right? Not complaining, but I come last, and I work really, really hard, and I'm going to be turning 40, and you've made me redundant. So excuse me all over the place if I have a think about what I would like to do with my life, not what you would like me to do. And what I'd like to do is sit at home and have a think, if you would excuse me. So I did. That.
Now, look, Nigel, you still, after all this time, it's still like it's so emotive for you, isn't it? Like I can see that you're almost angry still after all this time.
Yes. Well, because I think we can sleepwalk to our grave, and what a shame if you do. And so, yeah, I mean, I could go on for so long. So you got to shepherd me. But is what happens for many people is one of the big four happens: death, disease, divorce, redundancy. Yeah, and then you must have friends who or family who they've been working very diligently as a whatever it is, a lawyer or a postman or wherever it is, and then God forbid they get the awful cancer diagnosis or something horrible happens to one of their loved ones, and they come in and say, do you know what, I've decided, and they change their life on time, and you go, but if that thing hadn't happened, you'd still be driving to work crying to the law firm, and you do that until you're 63, and then what people do, and I don't blame them. There's a core message here, right? Is I don't blame them. Is if you're looking to other people and you're self-accepted, because I'm sure you give fabulous advice, but if you're looking to other people who don't have it as a job like you do, they're always going to say the obvious thing, because they care. I mean, I'd say it to my kids. They're always going to, every single person was saying to me, oh, Nigel, get back on the bus and have a job. You've got responsibility. Unless you are Elon Musk or someone, they're never going to say, I tell you what you should do, mate. You should sit at home with no income and think about your life. Because
you say that, but actually your wife was on your side, wasn't she? And she was one person that said, do you know what? If this is what you want to do, go for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have my theory about that. And check
tell me which is.
But my theory is that she was like, I'm spending all day every day with 4 kids under the age of 6. I really want him to see how painful it is and how much easier it is to go into the office. That's the only reason I said yes. That's my theory anyway, and I'll stick with it.
Hey, I think that probably stands up. That stands up.
And so, was your wife the only person that said, I think this is a good idea, do it?
Yeah, yes, and not to be defensive or unfair to her, she wasn't dancing in the street about it. I mean, I can be quite a determined chap, so she might have read the tea leaves in that I'm deciding I'm going to do this. Now, if she said, I hate your guts, if you do that, I'll never speak to you again, well, then I probably wouldn't have. But so she didn't stand in my way.
Yeah.
Which is amazing support, because many people in that situation would say, well, are you mad? How are we going to afford this? And what do you mean we're going to have to sell the car and move home? And so I was launching Fat Fortified in America. An American journalist, it was in Detroit, said to me, well, it was all right for you. You clearly had enough money where you could live for a year without earning. I went, yes. He went, well, so it was. I went, yes. Oh, sorry, you think it's a self-help book and I'm advising other people to do. Yeah, it's like people. It's a comedy about my life. That is true, and I was lucky. Although to some people they go utterly irresponsible because you spend every penny you've got and blah blah blah. But, but that I could exist without, earning money for that year. Now, the vast majority of people couldn't. Then therefore I'd say, well, then don't.
Yeah,
and it's not
absolutely.
It wasn't. It's not what to do when you're 40 from Nigel Marsh. It's what I did when I was 40, and I'm not going to apologise for the fact that I, worked very, very, very hard for 25 years and then lost my job and decided to take a year off and give up drink and.
So how clear was your plan when you decided to take your year off? Like, did you know exactly what you were going to do in that year and what would happen at the end of the year?
No. Completely and utter a train crash. Totally unclear. Clear as mud. And the book I've just written, Smart, Stupid and 60, which is just very nice to talk to you having been at the TED speech, because it is that bloke, 20 years later, and here I am, so, or 20 years since Fat Fortified, and is it 20? I don't know, whatever. It's a long time ago since the TED speech. So the 60 thing, I'm writing about people's third trimester. So people, I think your life stage is important, So when you turn 60, I think you're lucky if you go, well, how are you going to spend them? You have to think about how you're going to spend your life. So my plan now, and I've got a very, very unusual career, is clear. My plan then, totally unclear, and I just lived it for 20 years.
So how did that feel? Because you've had this really predictable career where, you know, the ladder that you're on is like kind of an obvious ladder, and you could probably say in 5 years' time, oh, I want to be in this position, etc., etc. When you're suddenly faced with a blank page where literally anything could happen, how did that feel?
So for me, and this is not for everyone, it felt fantastic. If you look at my life up until this decision, the Fat 14-5 decision, I had worked hard at a corporate career, which was great. Since then, I have set up a annual nude ocean swim that thousands of people do every year and gets worldwide attention. I've written 4 books. I've set up a thing called Earth Hour. I don't know if you listeners have heard that. People turn the lights out for an hour. I do a podcast that I'm incredibly passionate about, where I interview prime ministers, Oscar winners, Olympic champions. So it's
ordinary people.
Yeah, and lots of ordinary people.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on. I've established a coaching business, run a small consultancy. I've gone in and out and done different jobs. So life has been just thrilling. But for me, there are some people who like the predictability and consistency of, I don't know, I work at IBM for 40 years, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And there's something, a key point, and I get hired to do speeches. Another thing, I've got a speaking career, I travel on where I really don't like it when people foist their solution on other people. And if I maybe give you an analogy, is I see mums doing this, which is awful. You go, well, I've decided I'm going to be a corporate mum, so I'm going to look down my nose at non-corporate mums, or I've decided to have a nanny, so I'm going to look down. You go, how about just decide what you want to do and shut
don't worry about anyone else.
Get on with it and have a smile on your face and be nice to people. Now, then if you meet someone who says, oh, I like what you do and I would like to do it, have you got any loving advice? You go, oh, well, now that you ask, I think this and this, but not, I don't in any way think it's bad for someone to have I call it the hamster wheel because I'm joking and it's a short, but for many people, the hamster wheel is fantastic. They love getting on the train at Croydon and going into Waterloo and doing and if you said to them, do you want to do this for the next 15 years? They go, yes. Yeah. I'd love to.
Yeah.
So again, if I go back to an interview in America when I was launching the book, and someone was talking about if you were so Mr. Marsh, if you are a car worker that's been made unemployed and it's during one of the recessions in America, you recommend that they take a year off. I go, God, no, I'd recommend they got a job immediately in anything. I mean, how could you get? No, I wouldn't recommend that in any shape or form. If the only way you could keep your kids off the streets and yourself out of jail was getting a job, doing anything, get the job. So you've got to be sensitive to, which is why I don't. It's very important that the book. I didn't mention this because the word is really important. My last book is called Smart, Stupid, and 60. It's not called 10 tips. Well, it's because I don't want to call it 10 tips to be as clever as me. You go, people should be rightly cynical and take with a pinch of salt other people telling them how they should live their lives. What the hell do you know about it? What do you know about my hopes and dreams? And also, by the way, mate, didn't you have a successful career in advertising for 25 years? So you might have more means. I haven't got that much money, but as in, there's a wonderful Australian phrase, take your hand off it a little bit. So the reason it's smart, stupid is I think if you get to a certain age, I'm 60, I'm a wiser bloke than I was when I was 20. But that doesn't mean, just because you're old and you've got grey in your beard, doesn't mean that you got all the answers, and you should stay learning and stay humble. And
totally. Can we go back to your TED Talk? Because from what I've read about you and what I've heard about you, the TED Talk was a bit of a whim, but that actually changed things quite dramatically for you. Chronologically, where does the TED Talk sit?
Okay, well, that's a really It's a really, really good question, because it's quite an interesting asset to have. If somebody, I don't know, Googles me and reads my book and then sees a TED talk, it all fits in quite nicely. There's a very, if you are the Hollywood exec, you can make quite a nice line.
Mm-hmm.
Totally not true for reality. It was this. Yeah. So the truth, but it makes less of an interesting book. But for your, just ask me any question and I'll answer it honestly, is I went back 3 times to the corporate hamster wheel. So when I sat at home for a year not earning any money, that's not a sustainable strategy. And no one's going to pay me to go to the beach and sketch. Mm-hmm. So I've got 4 kids, and how are we going to sort it out? And you go, well, the only thing, I have to go back and be a corporate hamster, but I'll be a different man. And it was even worse after I went back.
Oh, really? In what way?
Well, because you sort of have a different mindset. You've been enlightened, but you go, I don't want to, put my wife and my kids second and a little, but I am in this job, and I can't say, well, I'm going at 3 o'clock to pick the kids up, because they'll rightly fire me, So it was agony, because I made a life decision. So I went back, and then I left again and wrote another book. And then I went back and left again, wrote another book. And then I went back and left again and wrote another book. Right. So I was in, when I gave the TED speech, I was in, and it was actually quite a, big in my little world, quite a big job, knowing that I was going to jump off again. And the part of the reason why Fat 40 and Fired was such a success, and why the TED speech has been seen by, I think, 7 million people now. That's
it's huge. Isn't it the most watched talk outside of the US or something? I think I read the other day. That's so cool. Yeah,
that's I had no idea that would happen. And part of the reason why I think it been so successful is because I was talking about myself. I couldn't. I mean, that was me on stage, knowing that I'm about to, do what I was saying, but for myself.
I think absolutely that. But in my humble opinion, also the fact that it's a very genuine talk. It comes across as extremely authentic, and there's so much humor in it, which we all love to laugh, don't we? And I think also the fact that you're talking about something that people are just genuinely really interested in. How the hell do I manage this whole work-life thing?
Yeah. And I think it's something that it's hard to know where to draw the line. But I don't know if you hike, but there's receding horizons. So if you're walking the coast to coast trek in England, was brilliant. But if you're walking at the Lake District or somewhere, you think, oh God, I'm knackered. But the top of the hill is 100 yards away. But when you get to the 100 yards, it's not.
Yes.
It is what can happen for all very well-intentioned reasons. Is there's never a finish line. Mm-hmm. So the really, really, really loving good advice that parents or grandparents or whatever can give you is, oh yes, but not now. Don't not now, Jane, not now, Fred. You just need to get, and they set a bunch of things that you need to do before you can take your life and your soul and your spirit seriously.
Yeah.
Okay. And I do my kids, you just finish school and just finish university and just get yourself a career and just do it. And you keep on doing that.
Yeah.
But then when you get to, 40, 50, whatever, those horizons can keep on being redefined in a way that if you haven't taken personal agency, you go, hold on, I think I can spot a trend. So I'm going to be 90 and say, do you know what? I now want to do some things that I want to do. Yeah. But you're going to say, oh, well, you haven't got enough money to leave your great, great, great grandkids.
Yeah.
And you go, well, when did that become a thing?
Totally.
Right? So you can be there where you go, so the philosophy of enoughness, now this is just not me, is doesn't matter who you are, I can reframe your life and your career so that the only sensible thing for you to do is to work really, really hard and get another promotion.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. You can say, I've paid off my mortgage. I don't think I'll go, yeah, but have you got a house in the Bahamas? Oh, you haven't. Oh, well, you can't afford one. Well, I can, if you worked hard and you go, wow, when are you allowed to do, I call it decide, don't slide. When you're allowed to sit down and think, how do I see this panning out? Right? So, I know people who have so much money, and they still think that they have to work really, really hard because they've got this narrative, which is now I understand. A bit like becoming an alcoholic is you cross a line, the victimhood narrative, where you go, it can be true that, oh God, I've got to go to work to provide for everybody and everything, and that genuinely be the case, and you genuinely have done that for 20 years, and then it not be the case anymore. Totally. But you don't recognize that or change your narrative.
Totally. Now, and it is the narrative.
That's right. Now, for some people, which is really important, is you have to look after your responsibilities and live in the real world.
Yeah.
This is not about a bunch of people being irresponsible and letting down the people who they are responsible for. But there are millions of people out there who could make a choice that would make them happier and the world slightly nicer, but they are petrified to, or they're being given bad advice or not the right advice, or which I imagine where your wonderful work comes in, where you go, actually, you have got more options than you might think.
Yeah.
Now there's going to be consequences, because if you were a high flying lawyer and you've noticed that you've been divorced 3 times and your kids hate you and you cry driving to work, but you've paid off the mortgage and you are allowed to not be the high flying lawyer anymore.
Yeah.
Now,
totally.
That does mean that you're not going to be promoted in the law firm because you'll have resigned from it. So if the only thing in your life is you to be the most important, and I'm picking on lawyers, I shouldn't, the important hedge fund manager or whatever it is you do, marketing director, well then stay doing it. I don't care. It's your life, not mine. I mean, if it's what I call the philosophy of despair. If it really is the case that the only way that you can provide for your loved ones is doing your job, well, then it's not a decision. Then carry on doing it, mate. I mean, I might ask you a couple of questions to establish whether that actually is the case. Mm-hmm. Last time I looked, you had a holiday cottage and 3 cars and no mortgage. And, but is it you have to keep up with? What are you doing? If you're sick, I'm 60. Do you really think anyone cares that I drive a Kia Rio, not a Maserati? No one cares.
And actually, the people that do care, you probably don't care about.
Couldn't care less.
The people that care about you really probably shouldn't care what car you're driving.
Couldn't care less. And I've come to the difference maybe between 40-year-old Nigel and 60-year-old is, and I'm very happy for my next door neighbour to drive a Maserati. If that makes you happy, knock yourself out. Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. Live and let live.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good advice. So actually, on that, it's a sliding door question. So if you hadn't been fired, made redundant, whatever you want to call it, at the age of 39/40, how do you think your life would look right now? Do you ever stop to think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really sort of sad, unpleasant version. I mean, I don't know, because what an interesting question. I like to think that I would have come to a realization anyway, but I think I am deluding myself. I don't think I'm that clever. I think I'm one of the people who needed one of the big 4 to happen to them to make the decision, and that's scary. That is scary. So, I've got a friend recently whose boss has been so horrible to her, so horrible that she's taken the decision to leave or whatever. I'm going, yeah, but it's really good that he's been horrible to you. Because if he was slightly nicer, you would stay in that job for maybe the next 20 years.
Yeah.
It's really, really good that he's totally contemptuous and dismissive of you, because you think, well, screw this, I'm leaving. Great. So my career paid for, looked after my loved ones, and it was my career. And I mean, I've hated it in many ways, because I just thought it was a bit pointless, but I still did it. And the terrifying thing to me is, if they hadn't closed the firm worldwide, I could be, I don't know, talking to you now, I'd be 4 stone heavier. It's 8 o'clock, so I probably wouldn't have had a drink yet, but I'll be looking forward to my lunchtime beer, and I'll be, telling you about, oh gosh, I just renovated the kitchen. I can see my life, and I don't want to be drunk because for many, many, many people, it's a great career and that's fantastic. But for me, I wouldn't have found a place where I could live. It sounds so pretentious, but where I could live my authenticity.
I don't think that sounds pretentious at all. I think that sounds bloody awesome.
So I like to delude myself that I would have come to, but I went back. I went back, and because you've got to deal with the realities of life.
Yeah.
And some people, I've got 4 kids. If I didn't have 4 kids and I lived in, and I was brought up in a rural area where houses were cheap, and I was a aromatherapist who had a little income that came in, well, then I wouldn't have to keep on coming back. But I bloody well lived in the middle of Sydney, and I had 4 kids who were in school, and yeah. So I think that a bit like that lady whose boss is horrible to her, I think me being made redundant was the best thing that ever happened.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Oftentimes we get pushed into these situations and it feels like the worst thing in the world at the time. And then it ends up being a complete blessing in disguise. I mean, it's so cliched, isn't it? But it's so true. Have you been in touch with the guy that fired you way back when? Have you been in touch with him since you've been doing what you're doing now? And has he had an opinion on what you're doing?
No, he wouldn't know me so the guy, the global bloke, if you're living in America and you've bought, it's a holding company buying a holding company.
Okay. So you don't think he's read your book and gone, bastard?
No. But although, this is sort of, I don't know if this is interesting to anyone else, but if you go down lots of levels, so I used to work in advertising and run advertising. If you go down lots of levels to the brand that I was in, the reason I lost my job was one brand called Leo Burnett took over another brand called Darcy. But the job I went back to a year later was to run Leo Burnett. Yeah. They called me up and said, I think you're the bloke to run. I go, it's me. I'm the guy you got. The one job you haven't got, you don't need 2 CEOs running. You can have lots of other things, but you can't have 2 CEOs.
Yeah.
So if you go down some levels, there are lots and lots of people. I mean, and Australia's a small country and a small industry. So yeah, there's lots and lots of people at a different level who know my story. And some people, I don't know, they're envious. Some people think I'm an idiot, and most people don't care, I'm sure.
Can you talk to us about the tipping point? Because you said you took the year off, dabbled, and again, I'm going to say, read the book. It's bloody brilliant. So you did all these different things. You did your TED talk. You've gone back into corporate. Where was the tipping point from going back into a corporate role to what you're doing now? Okay,
so with apologies to Malcolm Gladwell, that there have been a succession of them. So yeah, we're all on a journey. Is the fact that events were incredibly important. So I took that decision. But actually, the speech that you were at, the TED speech, where you go, this is, you and I should work together, where there's a model where corporate warrior is one model. Nothing wrong with that. Did that, and then Fat 40 and Fire happened. Now, I didn't have a plan, by the way. I then, looking back, know that I moved into a 10, 15-year era where my model was in and out. I'll spend all the money I have, put us into debt, doing the things that I love, and then have to beg for a job to pay for things. So in, out, in, out. And you go,
sorry to interrupt you, but was there ever a fear that actually going back in wouldn't be an option, that people would just be like, he's the in and out guy, not interested?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I would never have sold it like that. I'm just telling you that's how it was.
Yeah.
So my employability, increasing, goes down and down and down. Anyway, but so a period of year off. Year off is the wrong phrase, but you know what I mean. Write books, set up naked swims, learn to draw, lose weight, have some fun, and then got to go back and run advertising agency, whatever it is, and no guarantee. And this wasn't I've planned to do this for 15 years. It was what, looking back, I was doing.
Yeah.
It wasn't sustainable doing what I was doing, and then I would. And then around the time of the TED speech, where I had gone back in for the third time or whatever to do a big proper corporate job, I'm thinking, how about I actually solve it in a way that's sustainable? Yeah. Now,
and what did that look like?
Well, it looks like what I'm now doing.
Right.
Okay. Now, but in life, just because you want something doesn't mean you can have it. I ideally would like to look like Cary Grant, and it's never going to happen, right? So, my desire is, you can write this down, listeners, is to be paid a fortune to work part-time doing things I love. Right. So that's my credo. And we'd need to chat about the being paid a fortune thing, because and you can't make people buy your book. You can't make people sponsor your podcast. You can't make people hire you for speeches. You just got to, try hard. But that's what I would like to do, is authentically work hard. It's not about not working hard. It's having the pressure and the stress that you choose to have. So just pretend, I've asked Barack Obama on my podcast. I've had the polite no, but just pretend it was yes, but you're going to have to get to Hawaii tomorrow. Well, I wouldn't be talking to you now. I'd be swimming to Hawaii to do it, right? But I wouldn't be thinking, oh God, I hate my life. I've had to cancel all my interviews. And, I go, well, this is what I do. I love it, and blah, blah, blah. So but this is, again, not an answer for anyone else, but I now have a passionate dedication to short-term goals. So wherever I'm doing, and it could be talking to you, right? I'm trying to be as authentic as I can, chatting to you, and then when this ends, I'll go off and do the next thing I'm doing, which is research my next guest. That's what I'm going to, right? And it's not have a big master plan about I want to be the global CEO of Arthur Andersen, in 10 years' time. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next year or next month, but I know I've got a few fingers in a few pies. I do a few things, and I'll do them all lovingly, to my best of my ability, and what will be. And it's not and I can do this, and then when everything goes wrong, I'll then go back and I'll work for the blood bank. I'm intending, if I can achieve it, to carry on doing what I'm doing forever.
Yeah.
So on my podcast, literally my objective is to do one every 2 weeks until I die, and then hand over to my daughter Grace.
Brilliant. And does she know, and is she on board?
Yes and yes.
Excellent. Tick.
I won't know. When I'm in the grave, I won't know. She then says, "Oh, sod the podcast."
I only said yes to keep them happy. Yeah. With your podcast, I'm curious, because I really like the format of your podcast, and it's a clever format, because you ask all your guests basically the same question. Is it the favorite book, or is it?
So thank you for asking about the podcast. It is. It's easy to misunderstand, because as a shorthand, you pick your favorite film, book, song, place, possession. It's not your favorite, and it's absolutely, it's such a gorgeous gift in my life to do this. And just pretend I'm asking you, right? Where you go, oh gosh, in 3 weeks' time, I'm going to be on Nigel's podcast, and I have to pick a film, a book, a song, not my favorite, and he's going to say, after I tell him what the film is, but I already know because you told me and I've researched it, but he is going to say, and tell me why you've chosen that on 5 of My Life. And if you say, because I like it, you're a moron.
You're right? Out.
Oh, what's he supposed to say? Because it reminds me of my terrible first marriage.
Yeah. Or
it reminds me of my career change I made. Or, it's 5 stories about your life. So I've done prime ministers, Oscar winners, Olympic champions. So it's just supposed to be, you go, I wonder how she will respond to the 5 of My Life. I've had people choosing their own books that they wrote. I've had people that have been boring. It's not a crime to be boring. I've had people who've been funny, surprising, shocking. I've had more people, I can tell you, break down in tears. It's just a nice device, rather than, nothing wrong with podcasts that are, that are chats, but I am dedicated to the format.
Because it works. It does work. It works really, really well.
It's a lovely thing.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You get to hear things about people that you potentially would never know otherwise.
Yeah, and I've just done, I love the list. I've done people. You go, how do you choose them, Nigel? Because I've just had the Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland. I've had the Prime Minister of Australia. I've had the bloke from the Chairman of Love from Love Actually. And you go, how do you choose these people? And you go, as in what's the criteria? Because many podcasts are, like yours, which is brilliant, that they're in a lane where it's, how to learn how to fly fish or how to change your career. Whereas me, it's,
could be anyone.
I just wanted to talk to them.
Yeah.
You go, that's how it's chosen. You go, so there is no. So you've got the chief rabbi, and you've got Liam the builder. You go, yeah, I have. And the only thing is, I asked them.
That's brilliant. And you treat everybody the same. Like it doesn't matter who they are.
We're all God's children, and we're all half an hour in.
We are indeed. So when you're doing your research for your podcast, because I guess you end up spending a lot of time watching movies, reading books. I mean, it just sounds like you're being paid to just sit around consuming stuff.
So the truth, which, gosh, if I could make this work, I'd be a very happy man, is there are 5.4 million podcasts in the world, and most of them are utter rubbish. Ones that aren't rubbish, no one watches. And the ones that aren't rubbish that people do watch don't make any money. Now, I happen at the moment to run a podcast that's good, people do listen to, and it does make money because we've got show sponsors and all that stuff. But there's no guarantee that will continue and whatever else. But if I could maintain the current commercial arrangements for the podcast, well, I'm sorted. I am paid. I've read 110 books that I wouldn't normally have read.
Yeah.
I've met 160 people that I wouldn't normally have met. I've watched all the films. It's on a purely to take that question just as a personal thing. What could possibly be wrong that this afternoon I've got to finish David Sedaris's latest book?
Yeah, I mean, there are worse things. You could be cleaning toilets.
Unbelievable. And you go, if you're going to pay me to do that, if you go back to be paid a fortune to work part-time to do something I love. But got to live in the real world. And, the show sponsor pulls out, you don't get another show sponsor. Now, I'll still want to do the podcast, but then I'll have to hope that I get hired for more speeches. And then, I'm irrelevant and I'm old and no one wants to hire me to do a speech. And you go, well, my speaking. So you go, so there's no easy answer, but there is something. So I love the work that you do, because at heart of it, it's what I deeply believe is it's about conscious choice.
Yeah.
It's not about Gwyneth Paltrow, get up and do yoga and drink a green smoothie. I mean, if that works for you, knock yourself out, right? It's about you're allowed to have a think. You are allowed to have a think about how you'd like to live your life. And if you're 45 and you've worked very hard and you've dealt with many of your commitments, you are allowed to say, well, I know that your view of me is I'm an accountant or a doctor or a lawyer or an advertising executive. I'm not that interested in your view of me. I'm not doing it for mummy and daddy or to keep up with the Joneses. I've got a life to live, and I'm going to be underground in 20 years' time, and I don't want to look back. I mean, seriously, if I got awful news this afternoon that it was all over for me in a week's time, I would be really pissed off because I've got things to do and people I love, and I would like to be around for another 20 years. But I wouldn't regret the last 20 years. Whereas when Fat 40 and Fired had happened, I'd gone back and run an ad agency and hadn't written the books or done the podcast or done the things I'm doing, and I was told I had a week left, I don't want to get too serious on you, I would be devastated.
Yeah. I
would be absolutely, I go, what have I done? What have I done? I spent the last 20 years winning this account, buying a car. I'm big. I've got a fabulous relationship with my kids and a fabulous relationship with my wife. Yeah. I haven't got any money and I've got no relevance and I'm not important. But I would look back and go, yeah, but I'm very proud and pleased of the 20 years that I've had, with all its challenges and downsides. And the work that you do is really important, because there will be people that you can help them unlock maturely, not in a juvenile way. Unlock. You are allowed, and I actually think it's a duty, to think about your days on this planet.
Yeah.
And for many people, the right answer would be sit tight, do what you're doing, don't change it, and carry on for the next 30 years. And that's great.
Totally. I think you and I, we're probably not dissimilar in the fact that we're extremely lucky that we were born into circumstances where we had access to education, and we, I don't know, had parents that cared for us, etc., etc., and we were able to make a life for ourselves. And I think there are so many people in this world that literally don't have a choice. They have to go out and they have to, I don't know, pick up litter in the streets and resell it somewhere. I mean, this is the complete other extreme. And I think we sort of owe it to ourselves, but also to these millions and millions, probably billions of people in the world who don't have that choice. We have to do.
And what I'm glad you raised that as an example, because what some people do, got enormous respect for, is they realize that they are sort of alpha females, alpha males, where the notion of not striving and growing and succeeding, I'm not going to be able to do that. I know I can't, right? So you pivot, potentially, some people, one of my dear friends, Andrew, does this, where you go, right, so I was trying to be a successful CEO of a shampoo company, so I'm going to get more market share for my shampoo brand than another one. Nothing wrong with that, right? And I've done that for 20 years. I'm now going to put all those skills into trying to get clean water into a poor, disadvantaged African region, for example, or leukemia research or whatever else. So all of that competitive go and smarts and all that can just be rechanneled. And in terms of the benefit for the world is I would suggest better than swapping shampoo brands, but the benefit for the person, you go, yes, I am working 9 hours a day. I've got my victim narrative. Oh gosh, I'm so busy, and right? But I'm busy at something that matters.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of when people ask me, "Are you busy, Nigel?" I take great delight in saying, "No, not really." Right? And then actually, I am. But I say, "Oh no, not really." And I'm so sorry. Go, what are you sorry about? I'm exactly as busy as I would like to be, as I choose to be.
It's a travesty if you're not really busy and really stressed out. You're doing it wrong.
I mean, total arse. So you go, oh, I'm really busy. And you go, you're busy because you choose to do that job that pays you a fortune. That you want me to think you're really clever because you're busy.
Can we go back? We've mentioned your TED Talk quite a lot. Last question on the TED Talk, I promise. If you did have to redo that talk, would it be vastly different?
I don't think I'd change a word. I mean, I don't think I'd change a word. No, because what the message of I mean, am I allowed to say this because I gave it? It's a good speech.
It is a good speech. It's a great speech.
If you look at it, which I didn't realise, someone wrote, I get lots of emails about it, someone wrote to me, is when I go good night or thank you, whatever, I end it, the clock goes from 9:59 to 10. Mm-hmm. So I was given a 10-minute slot and it's 10 minutes, right? There's not a wasted word in it. And all I'm saying is think. And, it's because I would say it was different if I was giving advice. As you notice, some people, I love it. I love the nasty comments, not just the nice ones. You go, well, how'd you do that then, mate? And you go, well, I'm not clever enough to give 7 million people the answer to work-life balance in 10 minutes. So you're right. It's not. And I think there's they put it on the global site. And so my title was Nigel Marsh craps on for 10 minutes about some of the things he thinks. And their title was How to Sort Work-Life Balance, whatever, the answer. Right. And you go, well, it isn't the answer. But if I was stupid enough and arrogant enough to think, to have done a speech that was, this is what you should do, well, then it would have changed radically, because I imagine it would change. But Yeah, I wouldn't change any of it, because it's just a cry in the dark to, please think, pause for a moment, you wretched weaklings, and take stock of your miserable existence.
Indeed. I ask all my guests this question: what does success look like to you nowadays?
Well, I think to be paid and fortune in air bunnies, to work part-time doing things I love. Another definition I've got, which I quite like, is to have someone you love, something to do, and something to look forward to. So I would, a combination of those two things I've just said. Yeah. I've got someone to love, and I've got things to do, and I've got things to look forward to.
Both very, very lovely definitions of success, if you ask me. Last question, because obviously you're a podcast host and you do a lot of interviewing, but I know that you are gracious enough to come on podcasts like mine, which I haven't expressed how grateful I am. So very belatedly, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So I'm curious, do you prefer to be the interviewer or the interviewee?
So my wife thinks I like crapping on about myself, which is probably true. But if you look at the podcasts that I do, I was asked to do a podcast about me, an hour with Nigel Marsh or whatever, and I, politely said no, I'd rather kill myself. I haven't got anything to say, so I run out of content after a 1 week. I designed something that's all about other people and all about other people's choices. So I think the data suggests that I prefer being the interviewer. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. You go, so although it's been really nice talking to you, and I love the fact that we met each other at the Carriage Works when I did a TED Talk. But no, I think, I wouldn't want to be doing a podcast every 2 weeks until I die, talking about me, because I'm not that interesting, right? But if I go, I've got the Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland coming on, and I've got the bloke from Love Actually. So I am more interested in other people, even though if you push the right buttons, I will crap on about myself.
So maybe both.
Yeah.
Nigel Marsh, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure.
If you know someone who would enjoy this podcast, do share it with them and subscribe now so you never miss an episode.